Oh boy, here we go. Now let me post this topic, this is today's topic, up in the IGTV thread. If you're watching on IG, then you'll always see this because you're watching live and you can see this. I've just posted the topic on the thread. And if you're watching this, on YouTube, when I put these replays up, or IGTV or Facebook, then you'll just have to know. Today's topic is business lessons from Kanye West. But come on in before we talk about that. Come on in and say, hey, the lo-fi is at just the right temperature. This isn't coffee, this is tea. The tea is at just the right temperature. And welcome to Zadvice and tea today. What's going on? Come on in. Who we have in the house? We got, who do we have? We have Sal in the house. We have Rich in the house. What's going on, Jen? Thank you so much for your kind work on our recent project. Justin, what's going on? Easton in the house. Phil, what's going on? What's up? Today I wrote an email, and if you're not on my email list, you want to get on there because I'm putting up stuff every day. And typically what I do is I do some sort of inspirational or motivational piece, usually an essay of some sort, and then I'll do some sort of business piece as well. Right now I've been sharing these advices, but I also do other types of real strategic business stuff as well. So if you want to get on my email list, it's private, alphamentorship.com/sign up. You can get on there for free. So whether you're watching this over again on the replay or you're watching it live, make sure you get on the email list. You're gonna like it. But I sent out an email today that I thought was really relevant. I'm like, I should turn this into the topic for today's Zadvice and Coffee. So first, I will read you what I put in today's email because I think it's very relevant to you, and I think that it will make you understand the context for today's topic, okay? So let me read this to you. Just bring it up here on my computer. Okay, here we go. Remember this. Sometimes you have to be the squeaky wheel if something is incredibly important to you. See, people are busy, and even if they have your best interest in mind, it's important to remind everyone that your projects, your priorities, and your ideas are just as important as everybody else's. So speak up. Ask people to help you. Remind them if you're waiting on them to complete something, and don't let others drop the ball. Remember this. If you allow others to drop the ball on your behalf, you're actually dropping the ball. See, nobody wants to hear this, but how things end up in your life are 100% your responsibility. I've said that before. And even though there are a lot of external factors pushing and pulling you, it's still your responsibility. So you're most likely going to regret not speaking up about something and wondering what if, as opposed to saying a bit too much and having to rein it in. At least people know where you stand if you speak up. That way you can maintain your own integrity no matter what happens. However, you don't need to be an asshole. Think Kanye and tone it down 30 to 40%. So I was just reading the email I sent out today. I think it's highly relevant because speaking up is so important. What's going on in London? And by the way, as you come in the room, say hi and where you're from. Now, why is speaking up important? I found for me that I think, like many, I am a people pleaser. I want people to be nice to me, and I want people to also receive me well. I want them to think well of me, and so I don't want to ruffle feathers. And especially as a young man, when you're conditioned to be a people pleaser, you don't want to say things that are going to make people upset at you. Denise, what's going on? You don't want to say things that are going to make people upset with you. And there is a time and a place to hold back. But just as there's a time to hold back, there's also a time to speak your mind. And I think too many of us don't speak our mind when things are crossing our boundary or infringing upon us. And I think that's the first thing that I think Kanye can teach us about being in business, because Kanye doesn't hold back. Kanye doesn't hold back. And he always speaks his mind. He always says what's on his heart. And sometimes he goes too far. Sometimes he oversteps his bounds. There have been many times where he's overstepped his bounds. You know, from George Bush doesn't care about black people to Beyonce had the best video of the year to any number of things he's said. And you can say whatever you want about that. I don't agree with everything he says. I think he's ridiculous sometimes. But you have to respect the fact that he has the courage to say it, even if it sounds crazy. And I think there are many of you watching this right now who could afford to say a few more crazy things in service of saying what's really on your mind. Because often we don't say what's on our mind. And when we bottle what's in us, it festers there. And we feel violated because we're letting our boundaries be stepped on. So how does this apply in business? Well, in business, you know, as much as it is a people-pleasing game at times, it's also a game where you have to draw your boundaries. You have to create lines that can't be crossed for how people can treat you. And you'll find that as a people pleaser, you have to set boundaries because those who take energy and those who will cross boundaries, well, they're not going to set those boundaries for you. You have to set them. You know, you have to know when enough is enough. You have to know when, for instance, if you're coaching or consulting, a client is crossing your boundary. You have to know, you know, when you're running a business, whether your customers need to be, you know, put in line in a way. And it doesn't mean that you're rude to people. You don't have to be rude, but you have to know where your line is and make that very clear to people. And then even on your team, you know, as a manager, as a leader, you have to have a very clear line for what you'll accept and what you won't accept. And when someone crosses that line, you have to make sure that they know that you crossed that line or that they crossed their line, they crossed your line. You know, if you have other professionals who you're working with, whether they're partners, business partners, whether they're people you're trying to do a deal with, in business, if you don't draw your lines and keep a strong and obvious boundary, people will step on you. They absolutely will. Sometimes it's not always going to be intentional where they're trying to hurt you, but people are worried about themselves. People are worried about getting what they need. People are worried about their own objectives. And if you don't remind people where your line is, they'll go over that line every single day and they'll walk over it just like it's an open door. They'll walk through it just like it's an open door. So remember where your boundaries are and let people know when they've crossed it and be very clear about where that boundary is and speak up. And if sometimes you come across as rude or brisk or curt, that is better than being stepped on. Give me some hearts. Just click that heart button if you're feeling this right now. If you've ever felt like someone has stepped on a boundary or someone's crossed a line with you, right? If you've felt that before. I know I have in business. So you want to make sure that you're holding that boundary clear. Kanye is known for letting people know when his boundary is crossed. And you don't have to be like that, but you should know. So that's the first lesson from our friend, Mr. West. So, speaking of that, and also tying into this, you know, you got to know your numbers. You got to know your numbers. So Kanye has his Yeezy brand, and it's supposedly $1 billion brand now. That's supposedly what it is. I don't know. I haven't seen the numbers, but that's supposedly supposedly they did. I think it was valued at $870 million last year, which is great. So it's almost $1 billion brand. But if you guys have ever followed the Yeezy saga, you know that a few years ago, he was apparently $50 million in debt. I think $52 million in debt. So I'm obviously getting this information from, you know, his own retelling of it, but it's a great story, and I believe that it is at least mostly true. If you want to hear more about his whole journey, there's a great Fast Company interview that he did a few months ago that you can look online. Just type in Fast Company interview Kanye and you'll find it. So he was in debt pretty deep, and this was only a few years ago. And now he is at the head of $1 billion company. How? How does that happen? Well, from a practical perspective, it's knowing your numbers. When he signed the brand deal with Nike to produce Yeezys years ago, what ended up happening with them was pretty interesting. They gave him this brand deal, which is essentially them agreeing to produce and distribute his designs to the world. And the reason why he wanted to get with Nike was because Nike has the infrastructure. You know, a big part about the fashion industry that you might not realize is that when you're trying to get into like big manufacturing, there are so many little pieces of infrastructure, from the textiles to, you know, the plastic injection molding to the factories, that you have to have in line in order to create things at scale to actually sell to the world, and to really produce your own brand if you're really going big. And he wanted to partner up with a company that could help him do that. Jordan is a great example of a company that's done that. You know, Michael Jordan has his Jordan brand, and Nike is a partner with them, and they produce all this stuff. So Kanye got a deal with Nike, but there were a few problems with the deal. The first problem was they weren't giving him royalties on the sale of his product. They were giving him a flat fee, a flat rate. They were giving him $4 million a year, which is a lot of money, but probably not if you're Kanye, because your bills are high. You know, it's all relative. $4 million is a lot, kind of, not really. If your bills are $20 million a year, $4 million is, you know, it's only a piece of that. And who knows what his actual bills are, you know? And there's taxes that go into that, and I don't know if it was all at once. Like, there's all these factors that go into it. But Nike gave him a $4 million deal. It was a flat deal. It included no royalties. And not only that, but they weren't really allowing him to produce things at speed and at scale. You know, he said that he would call up on the phone and he would say, hey, when are the Yeezy Red Octobers coming out? And they would say, I don't know. And he would say, what do you mean you don't know? I'm Kanye West. You have to tell me, like, it's my brand. So he was having a lot of issues with getting the Yeezy brand out through the Nike distribution. And that's why for the first couple of years of that partnership, production was very slow, things were overpriced, and there were constant delays. It wasn't a mass consumer brand. And Kanye felt like he was being undercompensated for that. But he did something very smart. He never actually sold the Yeezy brand or the Yeezy IP to Nike. He just licensed it to them to distribute. Now, what does this mean? As opposed to the Jordan brand, which Nike owns, Nike doesn't own Yeezy, or they didn't own Yeezy. Kanye retained all of his IP and all of his ownership to that brand. So he was able to get out of his deal with Nike, and he went to Adidas. And rather than having Adidas buy the brand off of him, he licensed it to Adidas, but with a much more lucrative contract. And rather than getting a $4 million flat fee, he actually ended up getting 11% royalty, which I believe that's royalty on profits, not revenue. But he was getting 11% royalty of the sales. Now compare this to Jordan. The Jordan brand is owned by Nike, so Michael Jordan doesn't own it. He doesn't actually own his name in that way. Michael Jordan couldn't peel off the Jordan brand and give it to Adidas or Reebok or another athletic company because he doesn't actually own it. They essentially own his name. Kanye kept ownership over his name and just went and took the IP and got a different distributor, which became Adidas. Adidas gave him 11 to 12%. Nike is only giving Jordan 1 to 2% royalties, which 1 to 2% royalties is a lot because Jordan sells billions of dollars worth of items, but the scale between 1% and 11% is huge when we're talking retail all over the world. It's huge, you know? So now Kanye is doing 11 to 12%, which is nuts. And so right off the bat, he was able to create a completely different scenario for himself because he was able to retain the ownership and he was able to get a much more lucrative deal that included royalties rather than just a flat fee. And that is huge. Now, this happens a lot with up and coming artists where they'll see in the music industry, where they'll see a fat contract or a really fat advance, and they won't realize that they're signing a 360 deal, which means that the record company or the record label owns the rights to not only their music and their publishing, but also their name and their likeness and everything that they do for however long the contract is in place, sometimes forever. Like, you might not even be able to put up a picture of your own face online on your album legally because the record company owns it. This is why, back in the day, Prince took up a new moniker, which is the artist formerly known as Prince, because he was in a fight with, I believe, Columbia Records, and he couldn't use his own name because they owned his name. So knowing your numbers is so important. You know, everybody wants to be with Nike. Everybody wants to be with the biggest dog in the world. But it's not always about being with the most prestigious brand. Some would see Adidas as a step down, but Kanye knew his numbers. And so now, of course, he's out of debt. Supposedly, you know. And there are global lessons here, which is know what you're actually getting, you know. Understand how it's actually working. Look it out on paper. Have someone who you can trust help you figure this stuff out. Know your numbers. So being the squeaky wheel and speaking up is also a part of this too, which I talked about in the first part of this. Like, if something isn't working for you, complain, you know? It doesn't mean don't do anything about it. I'm not saying complain and don't take action, but I'm saying if someone's stepping over your boundary, fucking tell them. Tell them, alert them to that, and then understand your numbers. Understand what's really going on, because you're responsible for your business, right? So those are 2 Kanye principles. Third one is innovate big. And we've seen this with Kanye over the years. You know, he has never been afraid to take a risk on a sound or a look or an idea that might flop. And we've seen that all throughout his career. Everybody hated 808s and Heartbreaks, and then that became everyone else's sound. When Yeezus came out, everyone thought Yeezus was a terrible album. And now I have to say that's probably my favorite album of the decade. I mean, wow, I love Yeezus. Great album. And he's willing to take a hit for a few years while people literally trash him, while people literally downplay his importance, while they make fun of him, while they call him crazy. And then after a few years, people come back and they'll either acknowledge him or they won't acknowledge him, but they'll start stealing his sound. And it's the same thing with his clothing. You know, a lot of people mocked the way that the first Yeezys looked. They looked like space shoes. They looked weird. But I was in Aldo the other day, which is like like a European company, European like kind of fast fashion company in the mall, and Aldo's just basically ripping the Yeezys, you know. Yeah, Denny says I love 808s and Yeezus. Those are my 2 favorite albums. Oh, you can't stand Yeezus? Well, you know, you gotta figure out your sound. Yeezus is great for the gym. It's a great gym album. But I was in Aldo, and Aldo straight up ripped the Yeezy style. And he has an interesting style with his clothing of, you know, it's kind of like new age grunge. It kind of looks like a combination of Mad Max and like Tron. There are some futuristic elements to it and some retro elements. And he's going with his own style. And in fact, in the Fast Company interview that I referenced earlier, he talked about now how they're working to create everything from sustainable materials, you know, everything from, you know, no longer using plastics, creating clothing that's designed to like basically clothe entire populations. And that's a big vision. I don't know if it's gonna work, but the idea is he's thinking big. And Yeezy was the #1 searched fashion brand online last year. And I think part of that, besides Kanye being so enigmatic, is just the fact that their stuff looks different than everyone else's. It looks new, it looks original. Even if people might say that's ugly, it looks new. And you have to be able to innovate big if you're gonna go big. Along your path as an entrepreneur, you'll have stages of innovation. Maybe not everything that you make is gonna be the most innovative, but you should always be aiming to do something different than the norm. You should always be aiming to do something different than what's already out there, you know? You shouldn't be aiming to play other people's game. When you try to play other people's game, not only will you usually not win, but you're not gonna stand out, you know? And I think that so much frustration comes from trying to play other people's game and losing at it and being frustrated and wondering why. Give me some hearts. on the screen right now if you're sick of playing other people's game. I know I am. You gotta play your own game. If you take a personality test, let's say for instance you take a Myers-Briggs test, and it tells you what your personality is. Your personality and who you are on the inside is going to determine your strategy for how you approach life and how you approach business. You're not going to be able to do things the same way that another person does it. Elon Musk is going to have a different way of approaching a problem than you will. And it doesn't mean that your idea is necessarily worse than his idea, or that your strategy for getting things done won't work. Elon Musk will say, in a very left-brained way, he'll say, well, there are 24 hours in a day. Most people work 8 hours. So if I work 16 hours, mathematically speaking, I can get double the amount of work done. But that doesn't mean that you have to work 16 hours in order for you to be successful. It just doesn't. That's his strategy. Everyone has their own strategy. So you have to play by your rules. A lot of times, when you play by someone else's rules and you try to emulate or model them, it doesn't work for a few reasons. The first reason is because by the time you're modeling someone who's already been successful, that model is somewhat antiquated. Perfect example, online business. By the time you take a course about how to do an online business model, that information is already as old as the production time plus some, in order to get that program out. Usually the stuff that we're watching online, even if it's relatively new, is still subject to change, just like college courses. And so the fact that this funnel generated $1 million might have been true 6 months ago, but Facebook is different now than it was 6 months ago. And it doesn't mean that you can't take things and learn from that, but it just means that when you copy other people, you can't copy their personality. You can't copy the time in history when they're doing this. You can't copy their exact mindset. You can't copy the things that, happen by chance for them. And you can't copy all these other things that go into other people being successful. So when you try to copy others, that's often why it doesn't work. So I hope that was useful for you. And I hope that using Kanye as a reference point is a great example. So going over this again. Be the squeaky wheel sometimes. When something's wrong, or something doesn't make sense to you, or someone's crossing your boundary, or someone's hurting you, or they're not paying attention to you, or they're not giving you what you need to tell them. And be the squeaky wheel if you have to be. And be strong. And learn how to be strong. Because no one's going to do it for you. No one's going to do it for you. And you have to develop that skill. It's part of maturing. To not always be a people pleaser. To be someone who can strongly stand inside yourself, inside your own power, and say, that's not how I'm going to do this. You need to listen to me. My projects are just as important. My ideas are just as important. What about me? The second thing is, knowing your numbers. Understanding when you're going into a deal, what that deal actually means. If someone wants to pay you a flat fee for your services, or a percentage of your fee, or percentage of the services, or the revenue or whatever, that's fine, but think about how much work you'll be doing, right? Think about how much effort it's going to take from you. For instance, now when I work with a client, especially when I work B2B with other businesses, I was just talking with one of my partners today, and we're thinking about closing a deal. We're in the final stages of negotiating a deal, and I was talking with one of my partners, and I said, this is going to be a lot of work. Are we realistically willing to do this amount of work for this amount of money? It's not a judgment call. It's just literally thinking about, is this worth our time? Do we need to be charging more to do this? Is this the right amount of compensation? Are we going to feel resentful for accepting this deal, and then 6 months down the line, a year down the line, thinking, we didn't get paid enough? Think about that stuff beforehand. Don't say yes to a deal because you're so excited about just getting the client that you underpay yourself, and then you feel resentful because you have to do the work. Know your numbers, know your worth. The last thing is, from our friend Kanye, think big, innovate big, and don't copy other people, because you might be able to copy their strategy, but their strategy includes their personality, their place in history, where they are geographically, their relationships and who they know, and all the other things they have at their disposal, which are not necessarily visible to you, and copying them alone won't get you to where they are. You know? So don't copy. Take elements that are useful to you, but make it your own and innovate. And that's how you'll be successful. So anyway, hope those helped. What up, Josh? JJ, you came in at the very last second. We missed you. Hope you enjoyed that. This is part of my ongoing series. This is episode 9 of Zadvice and Coffee. Today it was tea. If you're interested in this type of stuff, you can check it out on my replays when I do these. I do put them on Instagram Live. I put them on YouTube. And if you want to work with me one-on-one, that's what I'm doing this year. Just a few people who really get it, who really get this message. I just don't have time to work with a lot of people because it takes energy and effort. So you can check that out at alphamentorship.com/elite, where you'll see how I work with individuals on their life and their business at the same time. In 2019 alone, my clients generated about $1.5 million. It was awesome. You could be part of that. If you have any questions, you can also DM me at Daniel DiPiazza on Instagram. I'm getting a lot of good questions now that I've started to do these for about 2 weeks. People are trying to ask good questions. I'm starting to put them up on the stories. So if you have questions you want me to answer here on these Advice and Coffees, feel free to ask me in the DMs. And that's all I got for you today. Much love. Hope you enjoyed the lo-fi. Hope you enjoyed the coffee. Hope you enjoyed the poncho. And I'll catch you on the flip side. Peace.